Have you ever felt just totally stuck in a rut? Or maybe overwhelmed by a loss? Or even paralyzed by a fear that just won't quit?
I mean, we've all been there, right? It's part of the human experience.
Right, absolutely. But what if I told you that the most agonizing, heart-wrenching wave of negative emotion you could possibly imagine actually has, well, a biological expiration date?
Oh, yeah. That's the part that always gets people.
Exactly. And that if you simply stopped fighting it, your nervous system would process that acute feeling in like 10 to 20 minutes.
Which is wild because we
Mm.
spend decades of our lives building these massive fortresses, ruining relationships, and limiting our potential, all just to avoid a 20-minute physiological process.
It completely shifts how we view our own internal struggles.
Yeah. So today's deep dive is dedicated to unpacking that exact mechanism.
Yeah, it's going to be a heavy one, but super practical.
For sure. We are exploring chapters 4, 5, and 6 of David R. Hawkins' book, Letting Go. And the mission today is to systematically dismantle 3 of the heaviest human emotions. We're talking about apathy, grief, and fear. And we really want to move past the abstract philosophy here and dig into the actual psychological and biological mechanics of how these emotions trap you.
Right? And more importantly, how to systematically release the emergency brake on your own life.
So to start, the foundation of that trap really begins at the very bottom of the emotional scale with apathy.
Right. The realm of hopelessness.
Exactly. It is the persistent belief that I can't. And, we often visualize apathy as a state of weakness, but in Hawkins' framework, it's actually an incredibly powerful active state of suppression.
Really? Active?
Yeah, it's a complete withdrawal of life energy where the individual just concludes, well, what's the use? I can't win anyway.
Wow.
We see this on a macro scale during severe economic depressions where people literally stop trying to find food, resigning themselves to starvation because the situation feels just entirely unchangeable.
Wow. So instead of a car running out of gas, apathy is more like actively severing your own fuel line, so you don't even have to try starting the engine.
That's a perfect analogy.
But, Hawkins makes a claim here that I feel requires some serious scrutiny.
I know exactly which one you're talking about.
Right. He suggests that the vast majority of our I can'ts are actually I won'ts.
Mm,
And honestly, I have a hard time accepting that at face value.
it does sound harsh.
It really does. When someone is in a deep, depressive rut, telling them they simply won't get out instead of can't sounds incredibly dismissive.
Yeah.
You're essentially telling a paralyzed person to just get up and walk.
Yeah, the phrasing totally sounds like an accusation until you view it as a diagnostic tool rather than, a moral judgment.
Okay, diagnostic tool. Walk me through that.
So Hawkins explains that I can't operates as a highly effective psychological defense mechanism because the human ego is incredibly fragile, right?
Oh, absolutely.
We do not want to admit to ourselves, or to anyone else for that matter, that we are terrified of failure or that our pride is blocking us.
Right, or that we just don't want to put in the work.
Exactly, we lack the desire. So the subconscious mind just slaps this convenient I can't label on the situation. Because incapacity is a much more socially acceptable excuse than unwillingness. It protects the ego.
Okay, so the I can't is basically a shield.
Yes, exactly, a shield.
So if you pose the hypothetical question to yourself, like, what if it is true that I won't do this? You kind of force the shield down.
You have to.
Like the example he uses about believing you can't dance. If you swap the word and ask why you won't dance, the underlying mechanics suddenly just flood the system.
Right, you realize you're terrified of looking awkward.
Yeah, you're unwilling to surrender your vanity to be a beginner. Or you're just reluctant to spend money on lessons. It's this whole constellation of specific fears and prideful resistances, not a lack of physical capacity.
Which means, ultimately, you are actually a free agent making a choice. Even if that choice is heavily influenced by fear, recognizing your agency is the very first step out of apathy.
That makes a lot of sense.
And this introduces a really fascinating progression in the text, the emotional escalator.
Oh, I love this part. Let's map this out using a universal stressor. Public speaking is a good one.
Perfect. So when you're stuck in apathy, the internal monologue is, I can't speak in public. It is fundamentally impossible for me.
But the moment you acknowledge that you won't speak because you're afraid of judgment, you step up from apathy to fear.
Yes.
And fear, biologically speaking, has significantly more kinetic energy than apathy.
It totally mobilizes the nervous system. And as you allow that fear to exist and begin to process it, you might uncover, say, a suppressed desire to share your ideas.
Coupled with maybe some grief over the professional opportunities you've already lost by staying quiet.
Exactly. And seeing that your fear is actively sabotaging your desires often sparks anger. So now you've moved from apathy through grief and desire and landed right on anger.
Which usually gets a really bad rap.
Oh, complete.
But in this specific trajectory, anger is actually a massive upgrade. It takes the form of resentment against your own limitations.
Right. It gives you that behavioral fuel to actually do something, like finally signing up for a public speaking course.
And the act of signing up moves you into the energy of pride. You've decided to take control.
Naturally, though, the moment you drive to that first class, the fear is going to return in full force.
Oh, absolutely. The sympathetic nervous system just flares up.
But because you're consciously aware of the process now, you acknowledge the fear on the drive rather than suppressing it.
And that active processing requires courage.
Yes, courage. And courage is a tipping point in Hawkins' scale because it's the first level that introduces positive, proactive energy.
Wow.
If you maintain that courage during the class, continually letting go of that residual fear, you eventually hit acceptance.
The internal resistance just evaporates.
Exactly.
You stop fighting the reality of the room, and from that grounded state of acceptance, you start noticing the other nervous people around you.
Your focus shifts outward.
Right. It shifts from your own racing heartbeat to their discomfort, which breeds compassion. And that selflessness brings genuine moments of peace.
It's amazing. You've systematically walked from the total paralysis of apathy all the way to peace, simply by pulling off the I can't mask and processing the emotions underneath.
It really is an escalator. But, and there's always a but, there's a massive psychological roadblock that halts this progression instantly, right?
Oh, yeah. Blame. Blame is the most seductive anchor in the human experience.
The anecdote the text uses to illustrate this is so bizarre, but so telling. The one from New York City.
Yeah, the public transit one.
Right. So years ago, a public transit vehicle was involved in a minor collision. And as the actual passengers poured out of the front doors to give their info and, secure future financial compensation, bystanders on the street noticed the opportunity.
This part is crazy.
They literally secretly slipped into the back doors of the crashed vehicle just so they could walk out the front and claim to be injured victims.
It's unbelievable. They intentionally inserted themselves into a traumatic event just to collect the payout.
Right. And the metaphorical payout of blame in our daily lives is just as lucrative. When we blame our parents or the economy or our boss, we get sympathy.
You get to wear the badge of the innocent martyr.
Yes. And most importantly, we get a free pass to avoid taking any responsibility for our current state.
Because blame is the ultimate enabler. It allows us to remain stagnant without the discomfort of guilt, but the hidden cost of blame is total disenfranchisement.
How so?
Well, if someone else is entirely responsible for your misery, then someone else holds all the power over your future.
Oh, wow.
And that self-perception of helplessness is the core ingredient of apathy. So to exit apathy, you must recognize that you are actively choosing the payoff of blame over the discomfort of personal agency.
That's huge. And we also have to audit the environments that reinforce that blame.
Yes, the company we keep matters so much here.
Like the story Hawkins tells about the divorced woman suffering from severe migraines and a recurrent ulcer. She sought support in a consciousness-raising group, but the group was primarily composed of other divorced women who were just steeped in bitterness and hatred toward their ex-partners.
They were constantly reinforcing each other's victimhood.
Exactly. They formed a trauma bond.
And the practitioner she was working with challenged her to leave that bitter environment for 3 months, to exclusively associate with people who had successfully navigated their divorces and built healthy new relationships.
Which naturally she resisted at first. She felt she had nothing in common with people who were thriving.
Because her baseline was so low.
Right. We often hear the phrase like attracts like, but we can ground this in actual neuroscience. Emotional contagion is a documented phenomenon.
Oh, absolutely.
Our mirror neurons constantly scan the facial expressions, tone, and posture of the people around us. And our nervous system literally attempts to co-regulate with theirs. So by sitting in a room of bitter people, her body was physiologically mirroring their chronic stress.
Hence the migraines and the ulcers.
Precisely. Surrounding yourself with individuals who have moved into acceptance forces your nervous system to adapt to a new baseline.
And it worked, right? In the company of people who had let go of their resentment, she suddenly recognized the sheer volume of negativity she was voluntarily holding on to.
Yeah, and as she stopped feeding the blame and processed her emotions, Her psychosomatic symptoms, the migraines, the ulcer, they just dissolved entirely.
Which brings us to a really critical transition point. The reason people cling to apathy and blame for years is usually to avoid facing the raw, unfiltered pain of actual loss.
Ah, yes.
This takes us squarely into the mechanics of grief. And Hawkins argues that to dismantle grief, we first have to understand its root, which is always attachment.
Okay, attachment. Break that down for us.
Well, we operate with really fragile ego boundaries. Because we often feel incomplete or insufficient internally, we outsource our identity to external things.
Right, we attach our sense of self to our relationships, our job titles, our bank accounts.
Even our pets. We invest so much psychic energy into these external objects that our brain begins to map them as literal extensions of ourselves.
So losing them doesn't just feel like a circumstantial change.
No, it feels like an amputation of our own identity.
That is such a vivid way to put it. The text highlights this with the example of an aging family dog, Rover.
Yeah, poor old Rover.
The rational adult part of the brain understands biology. It knows impermanence is a fundamental law of nature. But the vulnerable inner child views the dog as a permanent fixture of emotional security.
And to resolve that cognitive dissonance, the mind utilizes denial. We play ostrich. We practice cognitive compartmentalization, basically pretending the dog isn't aging to delay the inevitable pain.
And the tragic irony is that the anticipation of the grief often causes way more chronic suffering than the grief itself.
Oh, completely.
Which brings me to the most provocative claim in this entire text.
The 20-minute rule.
Yes. Hawkins states that if you completely surrender to grief, if you drop all resistance and just let it wash over you, the acute biological wave of that feeling will run its course in just 10 to 20 minutes.
That's the one.
I gotta be honest, I need the physiological mechanism here.
Yeah.
Because 20 minutes, that sounds like an arbitrary number pulled out of thin air for a self-help book. Profound, heartbreaking grief feels like it lasts a lifetime.
I know, it really does. But the time frame relates directly to the autonomic nervous system. You have to remember, an emotion is not just a philosophical concept. It is a literal cascade of neuropeptides, hormones, and physical sensations.
Okay, so it's a chemical event.
Exactly. When a wave of grief hits, the body releases specific chemicals. If you do nothing to interrupt that process, those chemicals naturally flush through the bloodstream and metabolize.
And that takes 20 minutes.
Basically. The nervous system reaches a peak and then naturally enters a refractory period to recover. That entire physiological cycle takes roughly 10 to 20 minutes.
Wow. Okay, but the key phrase there is if you do nothing to interrupt it.
Right. And our default setting is always to resist.
Always. We clench our jaw, we distract ourselves with our phones, we tense our muscles, and we tell ourselves, if I start crying, I will literally never stop. I will just dissolve.
And that psychological resistance signals the brain that we are under attack, which keeps the cortisol pumping and prevents the chemical flush.
So the resistance is what turns a 20-minute wave into a 10-year chronic condition.
Exactly. Hawkins provides a really compelling case study of a man suffering from severe pounding headaches. When the man began exploring his suppressed emotions regarding a past loss, profound grief surfaced.
But it immediately slammed into a wall of rigid social conditioning, didn't it?
Yep, the belief that men don't cry.
Right, so the headache was just the physical manifestation of him hitting the brakes on his own nervous system.
To process the grief, he had to systematically let go of those blockages. First, he had to surrender his masculine pride. Then he had to confront the sheer terror that the grief would somehow annihilate him.
Which is terrifying.
It is. And following that, he experienced intense anger toward a society that trains men to amputate their own emotional responses.
So by letting go of the pride, the fear, and the anger, he finally accessed courage.
Yes. He dropped the resistance and just allowed a massive torrent of sobbing to overtake him.
He rode the 20-minute wave.
He rode the wave. And the result was immediate. The pounding headache vanished. As the physiological wave subsided, a profound peacefulness emerged.
Wow.
And he didn't lose his masculinity. Instead, his definition of it expanded. He realized he was capable of holding immense vulnerability without breaking, which fostered this deep sense of compassion for himself and others.
That whole process highlights the critical difference between resignation and true acceptance.
Oh, that's a very important distinction.
Right, because resignation is a state of quiet defeat. You tell yourself, I hate this reality, but I have no choice but to endure it. You are still internally resisting the facts.
Which means the nervous system remains in a low-grade state of tension.
Exactly. But acceptance, on the other hand, is the complete cessation of resistance.
Acceptance is the realization that the struggle with reality is over. The text references the serenity prayer, the one commonly used in recovery programs.
Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change.
Right. Serenity is the biological and psychological byproduct of dropping the resistance. It frees up the massive amount of cognitive energy you were using to fight reality, allowing you to actually focus on how to move forward.
And the dread of facing that 20-minute wave of grief is what drives us into the final and most pervasive emotion in Hawkins's framework: fear.
Fear, the ultimate architect of our limitations.
So Hawkins introduces a concept here that borders on the metaphysical, but I think we really need to ground it in cognitive psychology.
Definitely.
He states, what you hold in mind tends to manifest. Now, if you strip away the mystical connotations, we are really talking about the reticular activating system in the brain, right? The power of self-fulfilling prophecies.
Exactly. The brain is a filtering machine. If you are chronically focused on a specific fear, you program your reticular activating system to scan your environment for evidence that validates that fear.
You miss opportunities because you're just hyper-focused on threats.
And furthermore, the anxiety alters your behavior, often causing you to unconsciously create the exact scenario you are terrified of.
The text provides such a painful real-world example of this. The medical intern who was consumed by the fear of public speaking.
Oh, that story's so stressful to read.
It is. He spent weeks obsessing over the possibility of freezing up during a case presentation to his colleagues. He poured so much anxious energy into that specific outcome that when the day finally arrived, his vocal cords tightened, his breath became shallow, and he literally lost his voice.
The sheer terror paralyzed his physical capacity to speak. His worst-case scenario basically materialized, reinforcing his belief that he simply couldn't speak in public.
But years later, he was forced into a situation where he had to present again.
Right. And to break the cycle, he sat down and confronted the underlying fear directly. He asked himself the ultimate grounding question: what is the absolute worst thing that could happen?
And the honest answer wasn't that he would die or be exiled from society. The worst-case scenario was simply, I might be a terribly boring speaker.
Which is such an anticlimax. But confronting the banality of that worst-case scenario stripped the fear of its life or death power.
Right.
He surrendered the vanity and pride that demanded he be a charismatic orator. He accepted the reality that he might bore people.
And when he delivered the speech, he read it in a flat, monotone voice. It was undeniably boring.
Unbearably boring.
But the internal victory was monumental. He had faced the terrifying situation and survived.
That single act of behavioral activation shattered the limitation.
Over time, his self-esteem grew. He actually began opening his speeches by warning the audience that he was a notoriously boring speaker.
Which is a brilliant use of self-deprecating humor. It creates an instant bond with the audience because it signals vulnerability.
Exactly. Eventually, he dropped his notes entirely and became this engaging, extemporaneous speaker, even appearing on national television.
All because he stopped fighting the fear and just accepted the worst-case scenario.
And a major component of that acceptance involves looking at the darkest, most uncomfortable parts of our own minds.
Oh, yeah. Hawkins draws heavily on Carl Jung's concept of the shadow here.
Right. The repository of all the primitive, aggressive, and socially unacceptable thoughts we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves.
The unconscious mind is basically a loud, wildly inappropriate roommate that you try to lock in the basement when you have company over.
Yes. You are terrified someone's going to hear them shouting obscenities through the floorboards.
But Hawkins points out that while your intellect has been highly educated and refined, your unconscious mind is still evolutionarily primal. It is literally still swinging in the trees.
We see this primal instinct so clearly in modern situations, like road rage.
Yes, road rage is a perfect example. When someone cuts you off on the highway, your uncensored subconscious doesn't rationally calculate, oh, they might be rushing to the hospital.
No, your inner caveman instantly wants to run their car into a ditch.
Because the primitive brain perceives a slight as a literal threat to survival.
Exactly, the dynamic Jung warned about. People expend enormous amounts of energy suppressing these thoughts because they mistakenly believe that having a violent or selfish thought makes them a fundamentally evil person.
But Jung argued that this shadow is a shared human condition. It's part of the collective unconscious. The expert advice here is to use humor.
Humor.
Yeah. When you catch your brain imagining something awful, instead of panicking, you just acknowledge it like, there goes the inner caveman again.
Acknowledging it removes the melodrama.
Exactly.
The thought loses its grip because you stop viewing it as a profound moral failing. But, there is one specific variant of fear that Hawkins isolates as exceptionally destructive. Guilt. Guilt is basically just the fear of punishment directed inward. Hawkins brings up kinesiologic testing, the idea that thinking a guilty thought instantly weakens your physical muscle strength.
Now, whether or not you subscribe to applied kinesiology, the underlying mechanism is profound. Guilt creates acute physiological stress.
It creates massive cognitive dissonance.
The body treats self-condemnation as a biological threat. We're often taught that guilt is a necessary moral compass, that it prevents us from doing bad things. But chronic adult guilt does not produce better behavior. It just invalidates your sense of self-worth.
It just keeps you trapped in a cycle of self-punishment.
Hawkins offers a brilliant reframe for this, though. He asks why we absorbed all this negative, guilty programming from society in the first place.
And the answer isn't that we are inherently flawed.
Not at all. We absorbed it because of our intrinsic innocence.
Wow, that's a shift.
Right. Children are essentially blank hard drives. They possess zero capacity for critical discernment. When the adults in their lives handed them a worldview based on fear, guilt, and limitation, they simply downloaded it as absolute truth.
We bought into the negativity precisely because we were naive and trusting.
Recognizing that your current negative programming is actually a byproduct of your childhood innocence allows you to replace self-hatred with profound self-compassion.
That is so powerful. So if fear, guilt, and apathy are the emergency brakes, what is the engine?
Hawkins points to a fundamental shift in motivation. It's moving from a negative push to a positive pull.
The transition from acting out of fear to acting out of love.
Exactly. Think about the underlying motivation for your daily habits. Are you driving carefully because you are paralyzed by the fear of a horrific accident? Or are you driving carefully because you deeply value your life and respect the safety of others?
Or, are you meticulously checking your work because you're terrified of being publicly fired? Or because you genuinely care about the quality of your contribution?
The external action might look identical, but the internal biological and energetic toll is completely different. Operating out of love expands your capacity, while operating out of fear constantly drains it.
We have dissected a lot of psychological machinery today.
We really have.
To synthesize the toolkit for you, we overcome apathy by exposing our I can'ts as I won'ts, reclaiming our agency. We neutralize grief by dropping our physical resistance and allowing the nervous system to process that 20-minute wave. And we disarm fear by shining a light on our primitive shadow and recognizing that our guilt was born from childhood innocence.
It is the systemic shift from being a hostage to your emotional reflexes to becoming the conscious architect of your internal state.
So here is a question for you to apply right now. Identify one specific area in your life where you feel chronically stuck. Are your actions in that area motivated by the fear of what might happen or the love of what you are building?
Now, what would it feel like if you stopped fighting the underlying discomfort and just let it exist for 20 minutes?
Facing that discomfort without armor is daunting, but the clarity and freedom on the other side are unparalleled. I want to leave you with one final image from Hawkins to carry with you. He compares the negativity of the world to a pail of crabs.
The crab.
A seasoned fisherman knows that if you catch a bucket of crabs, you don't even need to put a lid on it. Why? Because the moment one crab discovers its strength and tries to climb up the side to escape, the other crabs will literally reach up, grab it, and pull it right back down into the bucket.
But collective unconscious, steeped in apathy and fear, will always attempt to pull you back to its baseline.
So pay attention to the crabs in your own life. The habits, the media, the blame-centric conversations that want to keep you comfortably numb at the bottom of the bucket. Acknowledge them. Drop the resistance and boldly choose to climb out anyway. Let go.